When I left my hometown, I had no idea what kind of future awaited me. It felt like walking into a thick fog, uncertain of my direction but sure that I needed to keep moving forward. I thought I was leaving behind a life of comfort, only to realize it was built on lies and deceit. With no clear plan, I wandered aimlessly until I came across a small town that seemed as lost as I was. The quiet, the simplicity, and the chance to start over strangely appealed to me. In those early days, I craved a new beginning more than anything. I didn't have much to my name, but that didn't matter. I had to distance myself from the past, so I grabbed an opportunity most people overlooked, a rundown gas station. It wasn't much, but it offered a blank slate to rebuild my life. I knew that here, far from everything familiar, I could finally find some peace. The first thing I did was build a spacious retail store at the front of the property, facing the fuel pumps, intending to meet the town's needs. After the local grocery store closed at 7 p.m., I modified the pumps for self-service. To do this, I relocated the storage tanks, making the pumps visible from the store and freeing up ample parking space in our large lot. From 7 p.m. until midnight, those became our busiest hours. The convenience store operated 24/7, while the garage in the back opened from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays. I often came in on Saturdays for special projects. The bar wasn't thrilled when the store began carrying basic booze. It was like most small-town businesses. You wouldn't get rich quick, but it provided a good living and added much-needed jobs to the community. Each year, we managed to save more than most. With little employment outside of farming, most young people left town as soon as they could. After some restructuring of the store's merchandising, thanks to a woman I hired, the business became successful quickly. It repaid the investment I had made as a shareholder's loan, and we doubled the staff because of how busy it got. On Friday and Saturday nights, we sold a lot of junk food to people leaving the bar, trying to sober up before heading home. Sundays were popular for selling cold beer at reasonable prices. I was sipping a double shot of Jack Daniels with a glass of iced water and a lemon slice on the side, having just finished replacing a steering column in an old truck. It was a family heirloom, his pride and joy. It took me 8 months to find the part, and I had to hand fabricate some attachments. His family had driven that truck since the 40s, and he wasn't about to let it go. If he had his way, I thought, he'd be buried in it. Between 4 and 7 was the best time to be here in the bar. Most of the regulars would be having supper soon. The place would fill up with the music crowd when the band started. The farmhands brought the farmer's daughter for fun and after-work entertainment. In the 6 3/4 years I had been here, I built a solid reputation and made many friends. Most locals watched out for each other and would tip each other off if something unusual happened. I came to the bar once a week, always on Saturdays, at the same time for my one and only drink before heading home. It was my downtime, a moment to gather my thoughts in peace. Then I saw them walk in. I wished I hadn't. They ruined the end of a perfect day. I could still recognize them anywhere, anytime. And I wished I hadn't. The woman was my ex's twin sister, and the young man with her. I once called him my son. It brought back memories I'd rather forget. It reminded me how you can't see evil when you're living with it. Since I last saw him, he had grown. His appearance had changed a lot. He was starting to look more like his biological father. It proved to me that, eventually, the truth comes out. But why were they looking for me now? They went straight to the bartender and spoke with him for a few minutes. I watched her pull out a picture from her purse and show it to him. The bartender said a few words, and I watched them turn and walk out the door. I was thankful for my long, unkempt hair, full beard, and mustache, which gave me a completely different look, especially since I had lost the extra weight. No one noticed the text I sent out. "They're back. Be home when I can." About half an hour later, the bartender came over and sat down. "What did they want, Tom?" I asked. "They're trying to get a message to you. They heard a rumor you were living here and wanted to check it out," Tom replied. "They said someone named Willa is dying of cancer and doesn't have much time left. They're looking for you because she wants to make peace. I asked to see a picture of you, pretending I didn't recognize your name." "Who are they? And what do they want?" I lit a Pall Mall Red 100 after ripping off the filter. "The woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The young man is my ex's son, whom she passed off as mine for years. Based on your read of people, what do you think?" I asked. "Are they telling the truth this time?" "Judging by their body language," he said, "they seem to be trying to be honest, but they're definitely hiding something big." I nodded. My ex-wife and her sister had always been masters of deception, showing you one face while stabbing you in the back. He got up and returned to his spot behind the bar. My thoughts drifted back to nearly 7 years ago. When I left that day, I told them I wouldn't be back for 7 years. They laughed at me like I was some kind of fool, and to them, I guess I was. They learned the hard way that day. It was the last time they saw or heard from me directly. They didn't believe I was serious or that hurt. They thought I was just angry over some prank they had pulled. Little did they know that a few weeks earlier, I had found out our youngest was actually my brother-in-law's son. That revelation set me on a path of discovery, leading to where I am now. At that time, they had no idea that a family member had given me proof, saying she'd seen me get betrayed by Willa and Tammy, the evil twins, as she called them, one too many times. To her, they were black witches practicing pure evil. Earlier that week, we found a newly acquired insurance policy on me with double indemnity for accidental end of life. If I died by accident, the payout would be $4 million. The Grand Dame warned me to run for my life. When I walked out to my work truck that day, they had no clue it was already packed with everything I wanted from our 16-year marriage. I drove down the driveway, turned right onto the county road, and never looked back. By the time I stopped driving, I was 2 states away. I'll admit, I was partly to blame. I knocked Willa up when she was 16 and I was 18, just finishing high school. My family convinced me to do the right thing, so we got married that summer. Soon after, 2 more kids came along. They were still laughing about what they had done to me. Willa told our daughters, "Your dad will be back once he cools down. He really needs to get a sense of humor." A couple of hours later, my wife saw a sheriff's department vehicle pull up to the front of the house. She went to the door to greet him. "Are you Mrs. Willa Racine?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Ma'am, you've just been served," he said. "With what?" she asked, laughing, thinking it was some joke. When she opened the legal envelope, they all learned the hard way just how much I knew. I heard through the Grand Dame that my wife was devastated to find out I had ended our marriage without a second thought. My lawyer and I had listed all our assets and debts. The DNA report showed it all. The affair had lasted for a year. The divorce petition included times, dates, locations, and hotel receipts, even listing the credit card charged. The informant had even provided photos of the couple in action. Tammy, my wife's twin, had played a role too, babysitting our kids so Willa and her lover could carry on their affair. Inside the envelope, at my request, was a sealed letter. When Willa opened it, her sister, who was present, learned I was suing her husband for back child support, marital interference, and slander. That's when the laughter stopped. Suddenly, I wasn't the joke anymore. I was the one getting the last laugh. Their ongoing joke was that the only thing I was good for was making money. Everything I did seemed to turn to gold and create cash flow, so Willa and the kids were spoiled rotten. Later that afternoon, Willa found out I had sold the 3 businesses I built from scratch and paid off all our debts. Even the 2 apartment buildings we owned were gone. I'd sold them for a good profit. I canceled all the credit cards and removed my name from all the bank accounts. I signed over my half of our home to her and took half of what we were worth in cash. All that remained was for her to agree to the divorce. By doing that, I cut our cash flow from about 10 grand a month to 0. Sadly for Willa's sister, she also learned the cost of using me. My lawyer took them for everything they had before they got divorced because of the damage I had caused. He froze their assets before they were even served. Once their divorce was finalized, they were both ruined. My lawyer called Willa's sister back to his office and reimbursed her with a quarter of what they lost. "Why is he doing this?" she asked. "My client never cared about the money," my lawyer replied. "For him, it was always about principle, something you and your sister clearly lack. By giving you this money, he hopes you'll learn from this experience and have a chance to start over." Willa refused to finalize the divorce until she spoke to me in person, so we remained legally separated. I had no desire to speak to someone who had lied to me for years. She had to work for the first time in her life. It was a new experience for her to learn how fast money disappears when none is coming in. My lawyer forwarded anything important to a mailbox I rented at a FedEx retail shop. Once a week, they sent everything to my business address. I did this on purpose because I knew, given our history, their schemes would never stop. The 2 sisters loved to play with human emotions and manipulate everyone around them. Knowing them as I did, I knew they would plot their revenge. It wasn't a question of if, But when? In their family, walking away was not an option. It would drive them crazy if they couldn't find me. The longer it took, the worse their payback would be. Until now, I thought I had outsmarted them. But with Tammy showing up, I knew their game wasn't over. I finished my drink and headed home through the back door just in case they were watching the front. I crossed the empty lot behind the bar, circled around the block, and used the back alleys to reach my pickup truck. As I was unlocking the door, a man stepped forward. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Arthur," he said. "Seth Racine, I presume," I replied, turning to face him. "What makes you say that?" "My name is Peter Edwards." "Your eldest daughter, Connie, is my wife," he said. "Well, that could be a blessing or a curse for you," I replied, "depending on how much she takes after her mother. So why are you here, and what do you want?" "I came looking for you," he said. "There are some things from the past that need settling." "They would be if your mother-in-law would just sign the divorce papers," I replied. "What divorce papers?" Peter asked, looking genuinely surprised. I told him to get in his car and follow me. A few minutes later, we left the main drag of town, turned right, and drove about a mile before making a left turn into a long driveway. I stopped at a farmhouse and led him into my home office. I pulled out my divorce file, turned on the printer, and told him to make copies of anything he needed. Peter didn't need to know this wasn't my actual home. I had built it for the grand dame, hoping she'd one day want to move from her paradise. Peter was a nice-looking young man, about 25, with professionally styled hair. He carried a natural self-assurance and seemed well-educated. But the question was he who he claimed to be? And was he part of Willa and Tammy's scheme? He used my Wi-Fi password and uploaded everything from my computer to his laptop. As he sifted through the documents, he focused on the sheriff's department report Willa had signed the day she was served. The only thing he printed was the letter from Willa's lawyer to mine, which contradicted something he had believed. He showed no signs of knowing the truth he was uncovering. "Do you think Connie knows?" he asked. "That's a question you'll have to answer for yourself," I replied. "But I have a question for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer?" "Who told you that?" Peter asked. "Tammy was in town today with Seth, looking for me," I said. "That's what they told a bartender I know." "She's fine and living common law with her former lawyer," Peter replied. "She's currently pregnant with his second child. She asked me to find you so she could start the divorce, claiming she wants to remarry." He pulled out his cell phone and called his wife. I could hear her voice in the background. He then turned on the speaker so I could hear the conversation. "Connie, did you know that your mother lied about the divorce not being started?" Peter asked. "What are you talking about?" Connie replied. "You know our dad skipped town because he was going broke just after he left that day? Us kids weren't home when Mom found out. Later, Mom told us that it seemed our deadbeat dad had walked out on all of us. She and Aunt Tammy said he cleared out everything before he left town. If it hadn't been for our stepdad, we wouldn't have made it. I'm sending you a legal file. Get my sister to watch our baby," Peter said. "Then get back to me once you've read it." As they continued to talk, I got up and grabbed 2 bottles of Bud, opened them, and placed one in front of him. "Why didn't you tell my daughter you found me?" I asked. "Connie and I have been married for almost 2 years. She gave birth to our son 3 months ago. For now, I'm not telling anyone I found you," Peter replied. "As far as anyone in the family knows, I'm working long hours investigating a case." He opened his wallet and showed me his badge, proving he was a police officer with the Paradise Police Department. I opened my laptop, navigated to my hometown's website, and clicked on the police department's page. It confirmed he was telling the truth. "It was that fender bender reported a few months ago that gave me the lead to find you," Peter explained. "Connie filed a missing person report on you, which got forwarded to a watch for list. The insurance company informed me about the settlement in your favor." "So why didn't you tell Connie you found me?" I asked again. "After reviewing your detailed file, I realized something else might be happening," Peter said. "My first question was, what happened to the $250,000 Willa was supposed to have received on top of the house deed? The second is why everyone is lying about what really happened." "Sounds like someone's been fed a pack of lies, just like I was," I said. His cell phone rang. "It's my wife. I'll put this on speaker," Pete said. "So, keep quiet." "Hi, dear," Connie said. "Where did you get all of this? Is it real? If it is, we've all been lied to for years. Seth has no clue about his true parentage, just like I didn't. My sister Karen is going to be shocked. Mom always defended our dad so much that they're no longer speaking. This paints a different story from the lies we've been told. It looks like Mom and Aunt Tammy left Dad no choice. They've been playing with his life behind his back for years. And what's worse, the divorce isn't finalized because Mom won't sign off on it. Makes me wonder what's really going on. It's real. I got the information directly from your father's lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to find it. It seems her husband kept duplicate records on his home computer, Peter said. Thankfully he did. The files show that your mother was served the divorce papers the same day your dad left. I scribbled a note. Tell Connie to speak with her great-aunt Josie if she's still around. Peter nodded in agreement. Pete, finding my father is now more important, Connie said. At the very least, to get the divorce finalized for him. He deserves to be free from my mother and her schemes. What happened to the money she got? If she owned the house, why did she have to sell it? The more I look at these facts, the more I ask, what the hell was going on? And why was she planning to sue him for desertion once she found him? I have an idea. Have my sister watch our son a little longer. You go see Aunt Josie and tell her what we've discovered. Maybe it'll make her open up, Peter suggested. For now, let's keep this between us because there might be a strong case of fraud here. The real question is, why? Your mother has slandered your father for years. This is something I need to discuss with the district attorney. That $250,000 cash vanished after it left your father's lawyer's hands. One last thing. Don't even tell your sister, not yet. If the DA decides to investigate, it's better that no one knows anything. I got up to grab a couple of refills, giving them some privacy to finish their conversation. Why do you want Connie to talk to Aunt Josie? Peter asked. Josie was the one who gathered all the information on Willa and George's affair, I explained. She was never married, but she kept an eye on the extended family like a mother hen while raising her only daughter. Being a single mother changed her perspective on many things. She always believed Tammy and Willa had conspired to orchestrate everything. Both George and I were being used, but their ultimate goal is anyone's guess. If that's true, then why? Peter wondered. Josie's granddaughter Jody has been asking her to move in with her for years, I continued. Josie always said, not until the truth comes out. We see Jody when she visits town with her 2 sons. Jody lives a very private life just like I've had to. Dealing with the Withers sisters comes at a high cost to everyone around them. Willa and Tammy have been manipulating people for most of their lives. It wasn't until Josie gave me the evidence that I began to see it. Do you have any questions about your children and what's going on in their lives before I leave? Peter asked. No, not until I'm convinced you are who you say you are, I replied. Given the family history, this could be another part of their game, and you might be following their instructions. You should look into my lawyer's sudden end of life. If she plans to sue me, what makes her so sure she can win? Peter went pale, realizing the kind of people he had married into. For the first time, we decided to trust each other enough to exchange phone numbers. He promised to keep me informed if he learned anything new. I stood up, walked him to the door, and shook his hand as we said goodbye. Once he left, I cleaned up and locked the place down. I took the long way home, making sure I wasn't followed, giving me time to think things over. My life had improved greatly since leaving the past behind. Did I really want to dig it all up again? Could Willa and Tammy be plotting some long-term revenge just to get the upper hand? Knowing them as I did, I knew I had to be prepared for whatever was coming. If they had run out of money, they'd do anything driven by greed to get more. As soon as I walked through the door, 2 little munchkins clung to my legs. I bent down and picked up my 2 little ones. At 3 and 4, they were the apples of my eye, just like their mother. Go wash up! Dinner's almost ready! My common-law wife, Jody, called out. I gladly obliged. During dinner, I told her everything that had happened since closing the shop. I never could have imagined how much my life would change when I left Paradise for good. Almost 7 years ago, when I left town, I had promised Josie, Jody's grandmother, that I'd stay in touch, and I did. I made it a habit to call her every other Sunday. It had been a year and a quarter to the day when she called me, needing my help. Her granddaughter was in a troubled marriage and needed a safe place to start over. Jody was 10 years younger than me back then and had no children. I didn't know much about her since she lived on an army base out of state. But I owed Josie and was glad to repay her for everything she'd done for me. It took me a week to find a 2-bedroom apartment and partially furnish it for Jody. Finding a place in a small town is almost impossible. But I managed it thanks to a friend of a friend. On the night I went to pick Jody up, she quit her job, emptied her bank accounts, and packed her belongings. Her husband was going to be served as soon as he returned from his latest military assignment, a 2-week intensive training exercise simulating real battle conditions. He would be away from home for the duration. It was around 8 in the evening when I arrived at her address with the U-Haul truck I'd rented for the one-way trip. I had flown in discreetly, without anyone knowing. With the help of a few of her neighbors and friends, we loaded what she wanted into the back of the truck. I was in and out of her town in under 4 hours. When people asked where I was from, I refused to answer, simply saying, "For now, it's best that no one knows." Jody and I began to get acquainted during the drive back. It was the middle of the night when her grandmother called. I smiled when Jody answered, "Yes, Grandma, he picked me up. You could have warned me that he looked like a wild bushman who might clean up nicely if he put in the effort." The next day, Josie contacted Jody's lawyer, arranging for all legal documents and communications to be sent to my FedEx mailbox. Jody had warned us that her soon-to-be ex-husband would likely cause trouble. I took proactive steps to protect her. In time, we would both realize I was right to be cautious. Once Jody settled in, she took over managing my convenience store. Within weeks, she showed me that it truly needed a proper manager. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. She had a natural talent for it. The changes she implemented with my approval significantly improved the store's success. She put customer needs first, and her warm personality attracted new business. She worked closely with each staff member, assigning responsibilities and setting up codes of conduct. This turned the operation into a smooth-running business with no staff issues. Josie had to file a restraining order against Jody's ex due to his ongoing verbal threats. His actions after Jody left led to his dishonorable discharge, forcing him to move back to my old hometown, thinking that's where his former wife would be. Being new in a small town made Jody the center of attention, and to fend off unwanted advances from single men, she kept wearing her diamond ring. It provided her with some protection and gave her time to adjust to her new life. Within a few weeks, Jody was handling all the banking and catching up on the bookkeeping. She was accepted by everyone because I had introduced her to the community. Jody was beautiful in every way, but it was her honesty and personality that stood out to me. She quickly sized people up. With her long, straight black hair pinned back, she had a warmth that made her perfect for cold winter nights. I thought she would be a keeper for whoever she eventually fell in love with. When people asked who the lucky man was, she'd reply, "I'm sure you can figure that out for yourself." That simple answer sparked rumors. Soon, everyone believed we had met online, and she became known as Art's future mail-order bride. On Saturdays, since I worked alone, she started bringing me a lunchbox. I'm the type to get so engrossed in work that I forget to eat, and as a result, I had lost a lot of weight. During this time, our relationship began to grow. Within weeks, people assumed we were a couple. If one of us was invited somewhere, they automatically assumed the other would be coming along. Neither of us had been looking for a relationship, but we naturally fell into one. Josie kept us updated on things back home, and we found it amusing when we heard Jody's ex was in a friends with benefits situation with Tammy. The day Jody finalized her divorce was the day we took our relationship to the next level. We spent the night celebrating at the local watering hole with friends. While dancing a slow dance under the dimmed lights, we shared our first kiss. 6 months later, we moved in together. While the kids were bathing and getting ready for bed, I placed the small bathroom wastebasket in the sink and shaved my beard and mustache down to stubble. My children watched in awe. I took the bowl and brush Jody had bought me for Christmas, lathered up my face, and then did the same to them, much to their delight. Jody walked in just as I began to shave, her blue eyes sparkling in surprise. Our 2 little boys' faces were lathered up too. All 3 of them watched as I finished what I'd started. "Looks like Daddy's going to look like you with a clean face," Jody teased. "Should I cut his hair too?" The kids shouted yes. I laughed and said I could get the barber to do it on Monday. "No, I'm going to do it myself before you change your mind," Jody declared. After drying and dressing the kids for bed, they sat at the kitchen table watching their mom cut my hair. By the time she was done, I looked human again. There was more hair on the floor than what remained on my head. I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I told Jody she had done a splendid job and headed to the shower to wash off the stray hairs while she cleaned up. As I showered, her grandmother called. My daughter Connie had just left. Jody got the impression that Josie was preparing for a fight when it came to her sister's family. Josie seemed ready to take them down. Connie left her great-aunt's place with the knowledge that each of my 3 children was supposed to receive an annuity of $600 a month in lieu of child support, which I had set up through Mutual Life. None of them had ever received a cent. It turned into a wild night. If I had known shaving and cutting my hair would turn Jody on the way it did, I would have done it much sooner. For the next week, I had to endure jokes from everyone who knew us, like, "Who are you? And what did you do?" People asked Jody if she had to blackmail me to make me join the normal side of society. Jody, ever the jokester, replied, "I promised to force him to take a bath at least 3 times a week." Most people caught the humor. Some didn't. It was interesting to learn how things were going back in paradise when people believed they were above it all. The bird of paradise informed me that I was going to be sued for abandonment, desertion, and back child support in civil court. Jody and I found this hilarious. They thought that if they got a judgment, they could hire a collection service to track me down. When the mail stork delivered the news, he thought it was a joke. His boss and the district attorney had even hired a lawyer to represent me. He explained they were using my situation to buy time and gather more evidence. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had stolen over $48,000 from each of my children. They were now re-examining my former lawyer's sudden end of life with a fresh perspective. Jody's ex-husband had become a person of interest in the case. Reviewing the cold case, as I had suggested, the accidental end of life was now an open criminal investigation. If their findings were accurate, Willa and Tammy could face 7 to 10 years in state prison, and Willa's ex-lawyer, now her common-law husband, could be disbarred. Since he was the one filing the suit, they had to let the scam play out for charges to be filed. The lawyer hired for me would be paid by them. They wanted to gather all the records. I had to come forward at the end to give them time to build a stronger case against them. I looked in the mirror, half-jokingly checking for the word "sucker" branded on my forehead. For a couple of weeks, we enjoyed peace and quiet. Then Josie called us on Sunday night with some news. The paperwork was set to be filed on Monday. She emailed me everything she'd collected over the past 7 years. She had gathered a mountain of notarized statements, video-recorded personal conversations about what had been going on, and the names of 3 or 4 lawyers she recommended for a countersuit. What stuck out like a sore thumb was a $2 million accidental insurance policy on me. Neither of us had known it was still active. That explained where some of the money had gone. Jody learned that it had been taken out 6 months before I left. Jody and I spent half the night reviewing and forwarding all the information to the district attorney. We both now believed this whole thing was a setup to lure me back and take me out. The next morning, Jody called all the lawyers Josie had suggested and chose one. We emailed everything we had to them, along with a large retainer fee. As soon as Willa's team filed their writ, I would follow up with mine and have them served before they could reach me. Friday morning, Jody called me. "Josie is on her way here and bringing guests," she said. "They left Paradise on Thursday night, stayed at a hotel, and will arrive sometime tonight. They left under cover of darkness in case they were being watched." This told me things were coming to a head. Jody and I decided it was best to close the shop on Saturday and make it a true long weekend for the sake of family. Peter was driving, bringing Connie and their son. All Connie knew was that they were coming to see Jody. It was almost 7 in the evening when we saw the Ford Explorer and an Escape pull into the driveway. We could see 4 adults in the vehicles. As they approached, Jody saw the worried look on my face and squeezed my hand. My truck was parked in the garage, so they wouldn't know I was there. We watched them get out of their cars. "Who's all with Josie?" Jody asked. "That's Peter, his wife, my eldest Connie holding their baby, and Karen, my second oldest," I replied. "Are you ready for this?" Jody asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I answered. I picked up our oldest child, and Jody, lifting our youngest into her arms, opened the front door. United as a family, we stepped out to greet our guests. I was the last person my daughters expected to see. Karen immediately burst into tears. I handed my son to his great-grandmother and pulled Karen into my arms, holding her close. Connie, after passing their son to her husband, came over to me as well. It took a few minutes for emotions to settle down. Both of my daughters had grown into beautiful young women. Seeing them standing there side by side created a memory I would never forget. "It's good to see you again, Peter," I said, shaking his hand. After the introductions, Jody served up a huge dinner. It was a good thing she'd prepared extra. A prime beef shoulder roast, mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh homemade buns, Yorkshire pudding, and green beans. The meal was topped off with hot apple pie fresh out of the oven. Once our kids were settled in, we began discussing everything. First off, Art, is it all right if I call you Dad? Peter asked. I nodded in agreement. Then, Dad, Peter continued, the district attorney now believes Jody's ex's car was involved in the incident that led to your lawyer's end of life. We've tracked down the current owner and are working with the state to do a paint comparison. If the evidence connects, he'll be charged with manslaughter. Peter explained. The fire that destroyed his office happened that same night and has always been classified as arson by the fire inspectors. You can see him in a video, standing in the background watching the building burn. Since Willa and her lawyer had the divorce record sealed, they think there's no documentation to confirm what's really happened up to now. They filed the lawsuit against you this week. Jody glanced at me, her eyes tearing up. I always thought you were being overprotective when you moved me here. Now I see you weren't. I used to think the questions you asked my grandmother were a bit much, but now I get it. You needed to know what kind of man we were dealing with before making a plan. Willa and Tammy were served with your countersuit on Thursday, Peter added. Josie said they must have realized then that I was in contact with you. We were worried they'd come after me, which is why we made this rush trip here. Grandma, your house is ready for you to move into, Jody said. It's fully furnished. All you need to bring is your clothing. I've got most of it with me in my car, Josie replied. Connie agreed to ship the rest, along with my personal items like the antiques. I've given her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It was time for me to get out of paradise quickly. I'll drive back with Peter and Connie, Josie added. You handle the move. It's time to see if our suspicions are correct, I said. What suspicions? Peter asked. That the suit they filed against me is just a ruse to draw me out, I replied. With that $2 million accidental end-of-life policy on me, it's pretty clear that my lawyer's end of life was a test run for what they'd planned for me. Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie all went pale. It was like they were seeing the truth for the first time. None of them had pieced together the whole plan until now. Oh my God, they were planning to eliminate you, Dad, Connie said. And you knew it before you left. That's why you left the way you did. I gave a slight smile. I had a good idea back then, but even my lawyer didn't believe me. Unfortunately, he found out the hard way that I was right. Peter excused himself to make some important phone calls, giving my daughters, Jody and me, a chance to catch up. Jody pulled out pictures of how I looked when we first met. Both of my daughters admitted that they wouldn't have recognized me. When Peter returned, the room went quiet. Willa is going to be taken into custody the day after the holiday. We can hold her for 48 hours before pressing charges, Peter explained. She'll be charged with 3 counts of grand theft for stealing the annuity from her children. We'll slow things down to delay her bail hearing for a few days, he continued. Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday and rent a U-Haul to drive into town, stop at a few of your old haunts to make yourself seen. If anyone asks what you're doing, say you're here to pack up Josie's belongings, Peter suggested. That way Willa will have to communicate through the city jail. The DA said your theory makes perfect sense. Until you mentioned it, we couldn't connect the dots. When you arrive at Josie's house, we'll provide police protection until everything plays out. So, you're saying that my children's father is the bait you need to lure my cousins out? Jody asked. What assurances can you give me that I won't get a call telling me I'm a widow before we even get married? I looked at Jody. She saw the look on my face and sighed. Damn, you're going to do this no matter what I think. That's one thing about Jody. She knew me better than I knew myself. Jody, Art has always been this way, Josie said. That's why I called him to help you when you'd had enough of your ex's nonsense. Art would never ask anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He wants all of us free of those witches for good. If this is what it takes, then to him, it's worth it. Graham, I'm just scared that Art is going back into the lion's den, Jody said with a slight smile. Josie responded, If Art were a boxer, he'd be a world champion. No one thinks faster on their feet than he does. That's his advantage over those witches. Everything he does will throw them off their game. And remember, Willa and Tammy have no idea that Art knows anything. Ladies, relax. I'll be under Peter's watch, I said. And if anything happens to me, remember he'll have to answer to Connie, who is my daughter. Peter wisely stayed silent, just nodding his head. He knew how dangerous this could be for me. When I returned to Paradise later, Peter and I had a chance to talk while the 4 women engaged in a deep discussion about everything that was unfolding. Peter continued, The DA thinks Jody's ex will make his move shortly after he hears you're back in town. He'll find out that it was you who helped Jody get out of that awful marriage, and he's going to be furious. That information will come from Willa, Peter explained, who'll be fed that story by an informant we'll plant in the city jail early Thursday morning. The real question is, I said, if he gets caught in the act, will he spill everything to save himself? We dug into his military past, Peter said. Every time he was caught, he admitted to it and took responsibility. He's a follower, not a leader, so I'm betting he'll fold pretty easily. The only reason he's involved with Willa and Tammy is because he's easy to manipulate. As I passed the Welcome to Paradise, a Sanctuary City, population 34,823 inches sign, it hit me that the city council had decided the laws of the United States didn't apply here. It felt like the Wild West, where justice depended on what the locals wanted the police to do. Law-abiding citizens were often targeted, while others got a free pass. They called it the progressive way, but it was really the working class paying for everyone else's sins. Not much had changed in the nearly 7 years since I left. Except for the newly paved main drag, everything else looked the same. If I wanted to get noticed, my first stop had to be one of my old hangouts, if it still existed. Thankfully, Bob's and Betty's Burger Bar was still standing, just with a fresh coat of paint. I pulled into the parking lot, stepped out of the U-Haul, and headed to the entrance at 11:15 a.m., just before the weekday lunch rush. I was counting on the fact that, as a former businessman, my face would be recognized. We wanted the word to spread quickly that I was back. After taking a seat and glancing at the menu, I noticed a few people looking my way and several phones in use. The waitress came over with my coffee and cream and asked if I was ready to order. "Is the Wednesday special of meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes still available?" I asked. "How do you know about that?" she replied. "It's a regulars-only special and not advertised." "Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and a few fried onions on the meatloaf," I said. She looked at me like I was nuts. "Never mind, I'll tell him myself," I said, standing up. I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, with the waitress trailing behind, and shouted out my lunch order. Jack turned, grinning. "You stupid son of a witch," he said. "You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend." "Susan, bring Art's coffee in here," Jack called out. "Let's catch up while he eats at the end of the prep table." Jack was the original owner's son and had kept the place's name unchanged. We'd been friends most of our lives. We chatted until the lunch rush died down. He asked one of his staff to call his wife to come join us so we could catch up properly. "Art, you should know that after you left, my wife cut off her friendship with Willa and Tammy," Jack said. "She didn't like what they did or said about you and the kids." "Jack, a lot is about to happen," I replied. "An arrest took place last night, and if people are thinking clearly, it will trigger a chain of events like falling dominoes. Connie's husband, Peter, is working with me, which is why I came back early." Jack looked at me seriously and said, "He's one hell of a cop, one of the straightest guys around. He put 2 former city councilors in jail for corruption last year. You'll have to fill me in later. Too many big ears around here." I watched as Sasha pulled into the parking lot. Damn, she looked good. I sat down, waiting for her to walk in. I knew she would see me from the back first and not realize anything was up. "Jack, what's so important?" Sasha asked as she came in, before catching sight of me. I stood up and turned to face her. Sasha, my younger sister, lost it when she saw me. Her big brother was back. I pulled her into a tight hug as if no time had passed. It took a few minutes for her to calm down, and Jack motioned for the kitchen staff to give us some privacy. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sasha asked. "No, and let's keep it quiet for a few days," I replied. "Is this about Willa getting taken into custody last night?" she asked. "Yes, and things are going to get worse before they get better," I said. "Once I reach where I'll be staying, I'll be under police protection. All I can say is that the police are revisiting my former lawyer's end of life with new eyes. They now suspect it's connected to the arson of his office." The look on both Jack's and Sasha's faces said it all. With what had been going on in Paradise, it was well known that the DA, appointed 3 years ago, was working to clean up unresolved cases. "You're the bait to draw someone out," Jack said quietly. "If we're right, an arson, a liquidation, and several other crimes will be solved in the next few days," I replied. "All of this was orchestrated to force me to return. Willa's arrest and my sudden return will throw their carefully planned scheme into chaos." "What's really behind it all?" Jack asked. "A $2 million accidental end-of-life insurance policy," I replied, taken out on me. My sister walked with me to my rental truck in the restaurant parking lot. We were chatting when we noticed Tammy pulling in. "Where are you staying?" my sister whispered. "At the Grand Dame's place," I replied. I'm here to move her things to her new home. She wanted to get out of Dodge before everything goes down." "Josie left town?" Sasha asked, surprised. "She wants to be closer to her granddaughter and our 2 sons," I said with a smile. "Jody and I have been together for over 5 years. We have 2 boys who just turned 3 and 4. My sister was stunned. "You and Jody? How?" "Josie and I stayed in touch all this time," I explained. "When Jody needed help getting out of her bad marriage, her grandmother called me. I went in and relocated her to where I was living. We suspect her ex is responsible for my lawyer's end of life and the arson at his office." "Do Tammy and Willa know that you're aware of what's going on?" Sasha asked. "No, but they'll start to figure it out as they make their moves," I replied, just as Tammy began walking toward us. "Artem, I need you to drop part of your suit against us," Tammy demanded. "The DA is pressing charges against Willa within 48 hours. "Sorry, but my lawyer says we can't," I said. "Willa's new divorce petition claims desertion, abandonment, and back child support. Until the divorce court makes a ruling, everything has to stay as it is." "You can't be serious. How are we supposed to get her bail if we don't have any assets?" Tammy asked. "You have a court order freezing everything." "Maybe your father could help by putting up his house as security," I suggested. "After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy turned and walked away, visibly frustrated. "Willa and Tammy's father has wanted nothing to do with them," Sasha said. "Not since he found out about Seth's real parentage. He says they turned out just as bad as their mother." That put a smile on my face. With that conversation over, I climbed into the U-Haul and drove toward Josie's house, making a few stops for packing supplies. 3 hours later, I was backing the truck into her driveway. Using the large mirrors, I maneuvered it as close to the garage door as possible. After hopping out, I locked the truck and entered the house. I did a walkthrough to make sure nothing had been disturbed. Josie had told me she left the curtains open, but I noticed they were now closed. I texted Peter to ask if he had closed them. He replied, confirming that officers inside the house might have done it. With that information, I unlocked the front door and went inside. "Mr. Racine," an officer greeted me, handing over his cell phone. "Peter Edwards wants to talk to you." "Hi, Peter," I said, taking the phone. "It looks like the right people know now," Peter replied. "Tammy approached you at the burger joint earlier, asking you to lift the freeze on Willa's assets, and you refused." "I did," I confirmed. "We caught Willa and Tammy on tape discussing moving up their plans. Jody's ex, Brad Press, came up a lot in their conversation," Peter explained. "Willa told Tammy to let him know you know where Jody is. That alone should motivate him to do what we need." "It looks like our thinking was right," Peter continued. "An hour after that conversation, Brad showed up. Willa told him where you were staying. Our informant, who got arrested today, told her you'd come back to help move Josie. When Brad asked where, Willa said it was to Jody's place. Minutes later, I opened the garage bay doors and began unloading cardboard boxes from the truck, setting up to pack the house. Around 6:30 p.m., a pizza delivery arrived from Papa John's. I answered the door when the delivery driver knocked. "Are you moving?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Just came back to help a friend." Brad made his move around 11 that night. Using a tire iron, he smashed the lock on the front door and slipped inside. Seeing the kitchen light on, he headed there. Drawing a 9mm weapon from under his shirt, he found me sitting at the table, sipping a cup of coffee. "Hello, Art," Brad sneered, a cold look in his eyes. "Willa and Tammy send their greetings. I'm here to find out where Jody is so I can go visit her." "Sorry, that's something I'll never tell the man who eliminated my lawyer," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze. "Or the one who torched his office. But before you eliminate me, and we both know you're planning to, how much did they promise you from the insurance settlement?" "What makes you think I did that?" he asked, taking the bait. "Because you seem like the kind of guy they could easily manipulate into doing their dirty work," I said evenly. "So, how much of the $4 million accidental end-of-life policy on me did they promise you?" $4 million, Brad stammered, his face going pale. "They told me it was only $750,000. I chuckled. "Did you know that Seth is actually Tammy's first husband's son?" His face turned even whiter. "You see, both George and I were manipulated and used by the twins for years," I continued. "While working on my divorce, my lawyer sued George and Tammy for everything they had." Brad's jaw tightened. "That's how I knew Willa's lawsuit against me for desertion and back child support was a scam," I said. "The divorce was already settled. It just needed her signature to be finalized. She needed to lure me back, and that's when I pieced it all together. You're just their latest pawn. So think, What are they planning for you? My divorce only delayed their scheme to eliminate me. By taking out my lawyer, you brought their original plan back into play. You have the power to put them away for years, I continued. Knowing them as we do, what does your gut tell you? It's hard to watch someone realize that as soon as they're no longer useful, they'll be discarded. Either way, I'm screwed, Brad muttered. Making your lawyer crash into a tree at 70 miles an hour is manslaughter. Eliminating you would mean life. Manslaughter could get you 5 to 10, I replied, but liquidation is a life sentence. If I'm dead, they'll claim you acted out of rage because of Jody and had no idea what you were going to do. They set you up as the fall guy because most accidental end-of-life policies don't cover liquidation. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Brad hesitated, then asked quietly, "What would you do?" "Take the lesser sentence," I said. "Turn state's evidence and hope your cooperation counts for something. That way you get back at the ones who were probably planning to take you out with an overdose." I paused. After all, they must know it was your pill use that got you dishonorably discharged. Brad slowly placed the weapon on the table. "Call the cops," he said. "Brad, turn around," I told him. "They're already behind you." Connie watched her husband talking on the phone, wondering what was happening. Peter had told her that her father was at Josie's house. The late-night call had woken them both. While Peter talked, Connie put the kettle on for some hot chocolate. Peter was smiling when he hung up. "Your father surprised us all tonight," he said. "Brad broke in to eliminate him and wanted information about Jody. Your dad talked him down and got him to confess to everything. The undercover officers recorded it all on video." Connie was stunned. "How did my dad manage that?" "He told Brad some key facts, like the truth about Seth's parentage," Peter explained. "I think your father convincing Brad that the insurance wouldn't pay out for liquidation was the turning point. Even I'm not sure if that's true, but it planted enough doubt for Brad to choose a lesser crime over life without parole. Aunt Josie always said my dad thinks fast on his feet, but I never expected this," Connie replied. "What does this mean for my mom and my sister?" "If Brad agrees to testify in court against them, both Willa and Tammy will be charged with arson, manslaughter, and attempted liquidation of your father," Peter said. Connie picked up her phone and called Jody to fill her in. They made plans quickly. Josie would watch the kids for a couple of days while Jody flew in. Connie would pick her up from the airport once she got a text with the arrival time. After ending the call, she reached out to her sister to explain the situation. By this time, Peter was dressed and headed to the station to get a signed statement from Brad before the night ended. After he left, Connie realized she was too excited to sleep. It was after 8 in the morning when I finally woke up. The first thing I did was call Jack to fix the front door. He said he knew someone, and within half an hour, they arrived. The front door was replaced, new trim added, and a new lock installed. Just as the repairman was finishing up, Connie pulled in with Jody. Jody jumped out of the car and ran toward me, tears streaming down her face. I realized then how much stress I had put her through over the past few days. "Brad was taken into custody last night," I told her. "He surrendered to the officers here. I was never really in danger." "If that's true, why didn't you call me?" Jody asked, her voice tight with emotion. "Why did I have to hear it from Connie?" "It was nearly 2 in the morning when the police wrapped things up," I replied honestly. "I planned to call you today." I pulled my wife into a tight embrace and said, "I promise I'll never put myself in that kind of danger again." Once the repairman finished, we locked up and brought Jody's luggage inside before heading to my brother-in-law's restaurant for breakfast. Karen met us there, along with Sasha and my parents. Jack's staff had to push 2 tables together to fit us all. Jody got a proper family welcome from everyone. Breakfast was more than generous. Jack was so excited about recent events that he served everything. My parents were overjoyed to learn that Jody and I had 2 sons named Carson and Hunter, after my grandfathers. They looked through every picture Jody had of our children on her phone. My daughters shared their story about bringing Josie out and finding me. We were still catching up when Peter arrived, looking exhausted. "Willa and Tammy are both in custody now," Peter said. "Brad confessed to everything, including his plan to eliminate Dad. He'll be charged with arson and manslaughter after testifying against the witches. Tammy and Willa face charges of grand theft, conspiracy to commit liquidation, and fraud. The DA is currently meeting with the divorce judge who handled Dad's case to expedite your divorce." "Peter, are you saying Art and I can finally get married?" Jody asked, trying to process it all. The DA brought the paperwork and Dad's divorce file to the judge, Peter explained. He's hoping the judge will waive Willa's signature and the waiting period to grant the divorce. Jody, I said, I guess it's time I get you a proper wedding ring and make the proposal. Everyone laughed at my comment. Jody had tears in her eyes. She had always believed we'd marry, but didn't expect it to happen so soon. Before we left, Mom and Dad made us promise to come for dinner. We packed up until 5:30, then headed to my parents for a private dinner. They had many questions, and Jody explained how I rescued her from a bad marriage, thanks to her grandmother, and how she got her first job. We were still enjoying their company when Peter and Connie arrived with my finalized divorce certificate. It was a relief to be free. Jody took the chance to brag about our kids and life together. Mom then said, "You should have the wedding before you go back." Dad signaled for Peter and me to join him in the den. "It's been chaotic today," Peter said. "When Tammy was arrested, people started calling with more information. It seems what we knew was just the tip of the iceberg. Even the mayor might be implicated." "What about Willa's common-law husband?" I asked. "He'll probably be disbarred but won't face charges since there's no evidence linking him to the crimes," Peter replied. Later, Peter and I went to the mall where he bought Connie's rings. I picked out a 3-ring set for Jody. When we returned, no one had noticed we were gone. I was on the phone with Josie when Karen showed up with her boyfriend. Everyone gathered in the living room, and Dad had Jody sit in his chair. Sensing something, Mom watched intently. I walked over, knelt down, and proposed to Jody, catching her by surprise. "Of course," she said, tears streaming down her face. "The party is on," Dad declared. "I have years of celebrating to catch up on." That night, Peter had to drive us back to Josie's. It felt like a huge weight had lifted. Friday morning, we picked up the marriage license. Jody fit perfectly into Connie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man, and Karen became Jody's maid of honor. The DA performed the ceremony. I bought a suit from Macy's, since Jody wouldn't let me marry her in jeans. On Sunday, we exchanged vows in my parents' backyard with family present. Even the twins' father attended. Though we asked for no gifts, my ex-father-in-law handed me an envelope. "This isn't a wedding gift," he said. "It's your inheritance early. The rest goes to your daughters." I pocketed the envelope and forgot about it for the day. Everyone filmed the ceremony and sent it to Aunt Josie. Someone asked about our honeymoon plans. Jody replied, "After settling Grandma into her new home, we're spending a week in Florida and a week in California at Disney with our kids. Family is what got us here." The next day, I gave Jody the envelope. Inside was a bank draft for $100,000 with a note saying, "Thanks for helping Karma set things straight." She tucked it away without telling anyone else. After hugging our daughters and parents, we climbed into the U-Haul, finally free of the past.